The challenges and consequences of development in the Arctic region is our focus now. As many of you know already, views differ over the potential effects of wider development of the Arctic for commercial purposes, including fishing, extraction of rare minerals, oil and gas drilling, and these expanded pathways we've been talking about for shipping, possibly. Now, in this session, we'll have three speakers from Alaska, from Norway, and from England/Canada, it says. We'll explore the costs and benefits of development in this region. Let's begin, first of three, by welcoming Fran Ulmer, who until quite recently was chair of the United States Arctic Research Commission. As a former lieutenant governor of Alaska, many of us recall. She was also an Alaska state representative, and she was mayor of Juneau. Ms. Ulmer has worked extensively on policies that will play out in the Arctic's future development, including energy, climate matters, and management of natural resources. Her topic today is called Winners and Losers in the 21st Century Arctic. Welcome, Fran Ulmer, to the Camden Conference.
And I just want to say, I would normally be calling in from Alaska, which has been my home for almost 50 years. I live on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people, but I'm out of state this week, so I'm coming to you and expressing on behalf of many Alaskans and many people who live in the Arctic, our appreciation to all of you who are listening in today to learn more about this very dynamic place. It, as you have just heard from Paul, is a place where lots of things are changing. And you really do have to kind of understand that all of the other changes that we may be talking about over the next day or two are really based on these fundamental changes in what the Arctic is. And the Arctic of the 21st century is not anything like the Arctic of the 20th century. I think we have to understand that these changes in terms of warming, in terms of less ice, thawing permafrost, all of the ecological changes drive a lot of both the opportunities and the challenges. Perhaps the most important of which is the loss of sea ice. So when we talk about winners and losers, we have to start with the fundamentals, which is the loss of sea ice, which affects so many other things. As we know, there are many species that are completely dependent upon ice. They have evolved based on cold and ice conditions. And so understandably, they are somewhat stressed. Some of them are doing better than others. So let's briefly explore some of the winners and losers in this regime. Surprise, there are winners. So the bowhead whale, frankly, are doing very well, thanks to an increase in productivity in the Beaufort Sea. And this really matters to some of the indigenous people of the Arctic. For example, the Inupiat of the North Slope of Alaska that rely on many marine mammals as part of their diet. So this is one of the winners, at least right now. We have to remember that all of these things are very dynamic and changing. Arctic cod, it's kind of a mixed bag, whether there are going to be winners or losers. They were big losers during that very warm period in the North Pacific that we called the blob. And unfortunately, that just about halved their capacity to subsist and exist and thrive. Seabirds and shorebirds, really big losers right now. As a matter of fact, a study from the University of British Columbia estimated that we lost 70% of all seabirds between the years of 1950 and 2010 worldwide. So for a variety of reasons, primarily their food sources, but also warming conditions in the ocean, they're big losers, and so are the caribou. Caribou, not only because of parasitic flies in the summer, but also because of icing in the winter, which makes it harder for them to dig through the snow and get to the lichen and other food source. So I could go on, but let's just say, at least in the natural realm, yes, there are some that are doing better and some that are doing worse. And we are uncertain how long any of these trends will last. As I mentioned, for some of the indigenous people of the world, particularly the Arctic world, these changes make a big difference, both in terms of food and culture and infrastructure in the villages. We'll hear more about that tomorrow, but I did want to mention that for the people of the Arctic who have for centuries, thousands of years, relied on the food and the culture of the region, all being really tied to a relatively stable climate, now these changes are having huge impacts. As you also heard earlier, the thawing permafrost and the lack of sea ice and the coastal erosion that is happening in the north really changes dramatically the safety of living in coastal communities. So we know places like Shishmaref and Newtok and Kivalina in Alaska are already moving in various stages of moving because it's no longer safe for them to live there. So there are winners and there are losers. And I might just note the infrastructure issue is not just for Indigenous villages, it's also for industry. So for example, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, which has been there since 1977 when it was completed and oil started flowing, has had to continuously change the technology, the way in which the underground structure is frozen because the permafrost has been thawing. So both the technology has had to change and humans' ability to adapt, whether it is indigenous cultures or industrial facilities, all of those things are front and center for the people of the Arctic. So let's talk about some of the supposed winners. And as you already heard from President Grimson, there is a lot of potential that has attracted attention globally, not just locally and regionally. And these are the things that are usually held up as the possibilities that are attracting additional interest and investment in the Arctic. We don't have time to talk deeply about all of these, but I'm going to talk about a few of them. Shipping has already been mentioned. And so why is shipping front and center as an opportunity zone? Well, because the Northern Sea Route and the Northwest Passage offer a shorter trip, so to speak, between the various areas of the world. So it's shorter than the Suez or the Panama. As you can see, there are choke points, and that's why people in Alaska are particularly interested because of the Bering Strait choke point. But as you know, in Maine, there is also the interest of what happens on the East Coast and the potential there. Yes, it is shorter, and that is part of why Russia has stepped up and has really been actively promoting the Northern Sea Route. Not only promoting it, but investing in it in terms of additional infrastructure, ports, more icebreakers, et cetera, to make that a more viable and theoretically safer area. And as we can see, there has been an increase in shipping. It's still relatively small if you compare it to other global shipping operations, but it has been an increase, and in part it is because, yes, it is being promoted. For places like Maine, the question is it going to be primarily regional? That is, for example, between Europe and Iceland and Greenland and the East Coast of the United States, or will it be transshipment? Only time will tell. For those who are particularly bullish on this topic, I would say it has to be considered in the context of the Arctic, which is a very challenging place to work. Cold, dark, big storms. Remember, ice comes back in the winter. When we talk about the ice-free Arctic, we are talking about a relatively short period of time in the summer months. And yes, it's true, ice is thinning. So even in the winter months, it might be easier to go through, but there are still plenty of issues associated with the viability of increased, particularly transshipment in the Arctic, including lack of infrastructure, lack of navigation aids, inadequate charting in northern waters, et cetera. Tourism was expanding up until the pandemic. And I suspect that it will come back again after we feel safe to travel. We were seeing a tremendous increase, Norway, Greenland, Russia, to the North Pole. I went to the North Pole on a Russian nuclear icebreaker on a tourism ship in 2017, and of course in Alaska and in Svalbard. So I think this is an area that I would describe as a potential winner. If it is done right, and of course that is a big if it is done in a way that includes not only local people and local considerations, but the indigenous people, and done carefully, as opposed to super huge ships that couldn't possibly have people rescued if something went wrong, it is a potential zone for sure. Oil and gas also has already been mentioned. You know, when this USGS study came out over 10 years ago, there was a lot of speculation about what this would mean. And at that time, the price of oil was very high, which made development seem more likely, frankly. Now that the price has been relatively low, it has frankly attracted less attention. But if we think about where the oil is and realize that some of the countries that have the most promising prospects are also places like Norway and Russia and Alaska, where there has already been oil development in the Arctic. The question is, how much more? Well, a lot more in Russia. There's no doubt about it, because approximately 60% of all of Russia's oil reserves are in the Arctic, and over 90% of all of Russia's natural gas reserves are in the Arctic. It is quite clear that the increase that is potentially there is already being developed. In the Yamal area, where their natural gas is really not only already an existing source for Asia and for Europe, but the investment that is being made by Russia makes it quite clear that this is going to grow dramatically. Rosneft and Gazprom are investing and are seeking international partners and investors to really make this area an important piece of the revenue picture, as well as the job creation picture for Russia. Again, we have to remember, this is a very challenging place to work. And we've already seen some spills. We've already seen some reasons for us to have extra layers of caution. When we think about oil spills anywhere, we realize how difficult it is to clean them up in the water. And that would be doubly, triply true in the north. Cleaning up oil, particularly something like heavy oil, in icy waters would be next to impossible, which, by the way, is why there is a movement to try to get the International Maritime Organization to actually ban heavy fuel oil in the Arctic the way it is banned in the Antarctic. What about commercial fishing? So obviously, a lot of northern countries already fish in the near Arctic, if not in the Arctic itself. And this is an important source of revenue and jobs for many regions in the north. I expect that in national waters, it will continue. But in the international waters, the central Arctic Ocean, beyond national jurisdiction, a pretty amazing thing has happened over the last few years. A new agreement among all of the Arctic nations, plus the major fishing countries of the world, like China and Korea and Japan and the EU, have all agreed not to fish at all in the central Arctic Ocean for 16 years. This is a phenomenal step forward in really anticipating how not to make a mistake, how not to mess things up. Unlike what we usually do is kind of make a mess and try to clean it up afterwards. This is the precautionary principle at work. And it's a pretty amazing and wonderful enhancement in terms of saying, we don't know enough about the biological resources, the fish, to be able to sustainably manage a commercial fishery in the central Arctic Ocean. One or two more things I want to mention. If you are looking at sort of winners and losers in the context of where an investment is occurring, you'd have to add the military to that list. And what I mean by that is all of the Arctic nations that have military are also investing more in their military in the Arctic. We are seeing this in Russia, for sure. We've seen this in the United States. We've seen it in Denmark, Greenland. We're seeing it in Norway. We're seeing a step up in awareness of the region as not only a geopolitical tension area in the future, potentially, although I'm happy to say not today. It's still a region of tremendous cooperation. But to the extent that people are uncertain about the future, it is perhaps logical that there is this additional investment in the military, including exercises. The US Army is doing a military exercise in northern Alaska, even as we speak, trying to not only make sure that the equipment is appropriate, but that people are trained in a way that enable them to succeed. The Army's about to come out with a new Arctic strategy. The Navy came out with its new Arctic strategy called a Blue Arctic about a month ago. So we're seeing not only increased attention, increased investment, but also, I would say, increased concern about what these investments might lead to. So what about Maine? So what are the potential winners and losers for Maine? I'm not a Mainer, so I can't really say that this is a very comprehensive list, but a few things to think about, both for the possibilities, but also for the ways in which you might anticipate preparation. Shipping, tourism, infrastructure, and investment are all likely, I would say, on the East Coast as things become more viable, and whether the economics will be favorable associated with any of these remains to be seen. In terms of the fishing industry, it could be both a plus and a minus as fish move north, and we are seeing that happen. Obviously, there are also some not so good environmental and ecological impacts, I'm afraid. But I am seeing a tremendous increase in your educational institutions and your research capacity, with more and more funding actually going to universities literally all over the world, but certainly in Maine as well. And regional trade, I see regional trade and commerce certainly picking up. But there are environmental issues that, as I said, suggest both ups and downs. Lobsters may be coming north, but shellfish aquaculture may not be doing as well in the future because of ocean acidification. Rising sea levels hit every area that has a coastline, and that is something you're already monitoring. You're also already engaged in the Arctic. As has been pointed out, Senator Angus King has come to a number of the Arctic Circle meetings. He speaks on this topic. There have been new agreements between Norway and Maine, and when IMSCIP came, Iceland's largest shipping company, and putting its North American headquarters in Maine, you can see that you're on the map, and that is promising. So I will just mention briefly, it's not just Mainers that should care. We all know that recently the polar vortex has once again entered the lexicon of all the weathermen. Needless to say, the chill that the US has been experiencing is another consequence of less sea ice. Let's remember the Arctic is the air conditioner for the planet. And not only does it affect temperatures globally, but it is affecting the jet stream in a way that is really creating some unintended and unfortunate consequences for many areas that are not prepared for what used to be a more stable climate. So in conclusion, I just want to say, as you will be hearing all weekend, change in the Arctic is both dramatic and it's very rapid. The implications are local, they're regional, and they're global. Yes, some systems, some people, some animals will benefit, and others will lose. Given the tremendous complexity of the region, as well as the complexity of social and governmental organizations and the economy, The uncertainties and these complexities make it very difficult to predict exactly who will be the loser and who will be the winner. And whoever is today, winning or losing, may very well change. And the last prediction I will make is there will be big surprises, which makes it very hard for humanity to do the kind of necessary planning that we like to do when there's change. Change is inevitable, but the change that's happening right now is so fast and so dramatic that it really requires all of us to think carefully about how to do this best. So with that, thank you very much for asking me to join.